Todd Oldham's 90's work is having a real moment right now, and not in that nostalgic, isn't that cute kind of way. His pieces are being pulled for major cultural moments because they still genuinely work. But if you grew up watching MTV in the 90's, you probably already knew him. He was the guy on House of Style telling you that you could make something incredible out of nothing. And while all of that was happening, he was putting out some of the most ambitious runway collections of the decade. So, who exactly was Todd Oldham? What was he really doing, and why did he walk away just as fashion started circling back toward his kind of joy? Todd's aesthetic wasn't just busy. It was a deliberate antidote to the minimalism that was dominating everything else at the time. So let's look at some of the actual work, because that's where you really see his whole pop surrealism approach come to life. His spring 1993 collection was basically a love letter to where he came from. He took inspiration from the Texas State Fair with the big hair, plunging necklines and bold geometric prints. It felt like a high-end carnival, but in the best possible way. One of the standout pieces was an ensemble completely covered in a vibrant multicoloured harlequin diamond pattern, worn on the runway by Tyra Banks. It leaned straight into retro carousel geometry, and yet it was impeccably tailored, which was exactly the point. By spring 1994, things started to shift. The collection was called Dreams, and it moved away from the literal and into something softer and more ethereal. This is also where his mastery of screen printing really came into its own. He wasn't picking fabrics, he was engineering them. Two of his most iconic visual signatures showed up in this collection, the flame print and his photographic landscape prints. The flame print was exactly what it sounds like. Silk and velvet that looked like it was actually on fire, but the landscapes were even more experimental. He was wrapping the body in high-resolution landscape photography. Large, detailed images that almost read like a topographic map. Screen printing let him achieve a level of saturation and detail that traditional weaving just couldn't get to. He treated the garment like a canvas, using distorted pattern and scale to mess with how you read the body. It was genuinely ahead of what anyone else was doing at the intersection of textile and technology. Then fall 1994 brought the old master's moment. He started pulling from classical paintings and translating them into densely beaded gowns. He'd push his knitters constantly. If they said 5 colours was the limit, he'd talk them into 12. There were tie-dye velvet dresses, leopard prints built entirely out of hand-applied beadwork on graduating silk. The technical ambition was pretty staggering. Spring 1995 is what most people picture when they think of peak Todd Oldham. He was using sublimation printing, which uses heat and pressure to lock intricate patterns into fabric, and hand-painting stripes on the inside of white dresses so the colour would bleed softly through to the outside. And Shalom Harlow closed the show in a shimmering skirt completely covered in prong-set Swarovski crystals. One thing that ran through all of the collections was that Todd never used animal products. He used ultra suede instead of leather, and any animal print you saw was achieved through fabric manipulation, not actual fur. It was a creative constraint that, if anything, pushed him to be more inventive. Then came spring 1996, and if there was ever a show that summed up his whole thing, this was it. High energy, maximum colour, pure pop culture optimism. The cast alone tells you everything, as he literally had all the top models of the time. Todd leaned all the way into saturated hues, rainbow patterns, and playful textiles. One of the standout pieces was a multicoloured rainbow check strapless evening dress, with a structured corset top and subtle bust sequins worn on the runway by Amber. It was joyful and maximalist and completely unashamed, which was basically his whole career in one look. It all started in Corpus Christi, Texas. Todd grew up in a household where if something broke, you fixed it yourself. You didn't call someone. His grandmother taught him to sew at 9 years old, and by 15 he'd already designed his first dress, constructed out of pillowcases. After high school, he moved to Dallas and got a job in the alterations department at Polo Ralph Lauren, and that was his only formal professional training. By 1988, he was in New York with his partner Tony Longoria, and a year later, the signature line launched. Todd's shows had all the big names like Christy, Naomi, and Kate, but one of the most important figures in his world was Billy Beyond. Billy was a fixture on his runway at a time when the mainstream fashion press didn't really know what to do with that, and mostly filed it under gender bender and moved on. Todd's reasoning was completely different. He cast Billy because he thought he was the best walker in the industry. That's it. He'd say that no one moved like him, not even the top supermodels at the time. And Billy was also a perfect sample size, and could wear the women's collection without a single alteration. They were genuine creative collaborators, and for Todd, the conversation started and ended with the work. If you didn't watch Todd on a runway, you probably saw him on MTV. From 1993 to 1999, he worked on House of Style, hosting a segment called Todd Time. Essentially, it was a 3-minute DIY crash course where he'd show you how to make high fashion-inspired pieces out of whatever you had lying around. We're talking a glue gun and a stapler. I still remember this segment where he'd found a chair at a flea market and transformed it. It stripped away everything pretentious about the industry. The point was never the price tag, it was that you could make something genuinely great yourself. Then there was the Nanny. Todd's relationship with the TV show was one of the more genuinely fun fashion crossovers of the decade. His designs were such a natural fit for Fran Fine's character that the show actually wrote him into the story. He played Fran's cousin, affectionately known as Cousin Totty, which was the show's way of explaining how a nanny could afford a designer wardrobe. The costume designer pulled heavily from his archives, and unlike a lot of designers who were precious about how their work was used, Todd was completely open to it. He and Fran Drescher became close friends, and he'd regularly lend pieces directly to the production. It was a genuinely mutual relationship rather than just a brand placement. Because Todd meticulously preserved his entire runway catalogue is what made exhibitions possible. He never held sample sales at the end of his seasons, which meant his studio kept an almost flawless record of every piece that ever walked his runway. In 2016, that archive became All of Everything, his first solo museum retrospective covering his entire 90's run. The show premiered at the Rhode Island School of Design Museum before travelling to the Wexner Center for the Arts in Ohio, and Todd was hands-on throughout. Rather than a straight timeline, he personally restyled more than 65 of his original runway ensembles to feel current, and set them inside a gallery designed to look like an opulent French topiary garden. So very Todd. In 1999, at the height of his fame, Todd Oldham did something nobody saw coming. He walked away. He'd grown disillusioned with what he called the insane logistics of the industry, and specifically with the core engine of fashion itself. The requirement that you make your own work obsolete every 6 months just to have something new to sell. That just wasn't how he thought about his career. He saw it less as a traditional designer trajectory and more as a series of projects. And by the late 90s, those projects were already pulling him into photography, film, and interior design. His work on the hotel in South Beach is still talked about as one of the more distinctive boutique hotel interiors of that era. Rather than sell his label to a conglomerate, he chose to close up shop and keep the entire archive intact. He kept everything. And that decision is what eventually made retrospective exhibitions possible. It's a rare case where walking away actually preserved something rather than erasing it. So why are we still talking about Todd Oldham today? Long before anyone coined the term dopamine dressing, he was already doing it, but with a level of craft that a lot of people completely overlooked at the time. And now, as fashion edges away from the quiet luxury, stylists are pulling from his archives constantly because those pieces don't need reinterpretation, they still just work. This was a designer experimenting with fabrics and engineering his own textiles, championing reuse and DIY creativity, and refusing to use animal products long before sustainability became a regular industry language. That's not random maximalism, that's a very clear worldview.